Welcome again to BHA Live. It's great to see so many of you joining us from all over the country to be part of this ongoing series of educational events hosted by Barbershop Harmony Australia's Harmony Academy. Hey, if this is your first session, welcome. Why not check out our other sessions, which are all available? They're all on the BHA Facebook page. If this isn't your first session, then welcome back. I'm sure you know how good this series has been, and I expect tonight will be just as beneficial. Tonight, our BHA Live is presented by a man who may be new to some of you and very, very well known to others of you. Ian Mulholland is the immediate past president of BHA. He's a qualified music judge, and he's also chairman of our Australasian Guild of Barbershop Judges. You might know now that you might also want to know that Ian has served on the BHA National Council for close to 15 of his 30-year career in barbershop. Now, Ian got his first degree in Sydney, his second degree in North Queensland, and recently I hear he got the third degree at the local police station after an awkward first night out of lockdown. He's a trained secondary school teacher and geologist, and he's a high-level AMEB qualifications in piano, musicianship, and music theory. Ian has been a chorus director, and he currently works semi-professionally as a music director and performer in bands and music theatre. He's won 4 gold and 3 silver medals in BHA Open Quartet contests and more national chorus medals than you can poke a stick at. He's represented BHA at international contests 9 times in either quartet or chorus. Now, Ian's an accomplished arranger, and he's compiled and edited the popular Great Australian Barbershop Songbook. He's here tonight to give us some great tips on how to understand the weird and wacky world of written music. I hope he's going to do a better job on his presentation than he did on writing this particular introduction. But ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to a screen coming to you right now, the wonderful and very capable Mr. Ian Mulholland.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. I was asked to present to you a webinar on music theory for beginners. So let's get into it. So, why should you bother with music theory? You know, I hear people say, well, I can sing along to recordings. My chorus provides me with learning tracks. I tried to learn to read music once, but it was too hard. I don't have time to learn. These are all reasons why people don't bother with music theory. Barbershop singing is all about singing by ear. And I can successfully sing without knowing anything about music theory. Well, those are all true. There's no problem there. But there are some reasons why you should learn music theory. And probably the most important one is that you can make progress more quickly. You can move through music, you can learn music more quickly. And you'll have an understanding of what you're doing. You'll understand how the song is constructed, and you'll understand what the notes mean. You'll have tools to work things out yourself. There's nothing like understanding and being able to figure out things for yourself rather than rely on others to tell you. You'll also gain an appreciation, I hope, of other forms of music, whether you like classical music or rock music or whatever. You won't have to rely on others to make your learning tracks. Looking at you, Dan. You'll take more interest in the music you are singing and therefore enjoy it more. And you'll become a better musician. So I think there are some very strong reasons to learn music theory. That includes learning to read music, although I'm not going to talk about necessarily just reading music tonight. I'm going to talk about a whole range of things. Okay, so the outline of tonight. First of all, we'll start with a little bit of physics. A bit of physics of sound is, just to explain how music works. And then we'll talk about some music fundamentals, music notation, common notation, and then we'll start making music and we'll start looking at the applications of that to barbershop. So first of all, a little bit of physics. The diagram on the right here shows you what happens when a string vibrates. So the pitch or the frequency is relative to the length of the string, and the amplitude of the string vibration creates the volume. If we halve the length of the string, it doubles the frequency, and this actually creates in music what we call an octave. So, for example, if we've got a frequency of 220 and we halve the length of the string, we then get a frequency of 440. If we halve it again, so from 2A to 4A, we create another octave and so on. The other ratios that we can do, such as 3 and 5 and so forth, create other tones like the fifth and the third, which you'll have heard about. And when we sing, the relationships are similar. In other words, the length of our vocal cords determine the pitch that we sing, and the amplitude of vibration determines the volume. But there comes a point where you can't really vibrate a very short string or a very short vocal cord. Hence we reach the top of our range. And so we're going to see that in the video. The bottom of our range is defined by the fixed length and thickness of our vocal cords. So unfortunately, our vocal cords are what we've got, and we need to use them as best we can, but we can't actually change the physical parameters of our vocal cord. So in this video that I'm going to show you, you'll see a vibrating string, and you'll see at the low frequency, it vibrates a lot. So therefore, if it was a vocal cord, it would be producing a lot of volume. But as we increase the frequency, the vibrations become much smaller. So here we go. So this particular, there's the string vibrating. This particular example is going to, but it's going to vibrate at 13.7. Don't worry about the frequency. What we are doing though is we are going to double and triple the frequency and see what happens. So here it is. This is one node, if you like. So that's the first diagram. Here it is when we've doubled the frequency, and you can see that now it's vibrating and now 3 times. You can see the 3 different nodes, but you can see the amplitude of the string vibration is decreasing as we increase the frequency. There's 4, there's 5, and we'll get to 6. Okay. All right, so I just wanted to show you that because I think it demonstrates what actually happens with our vocal cord and how the vocal cord produces sound, and we make music from that. So let's talk about some music fundamentals. So first of all, we can hear music, but humans desired to be able to write it down. Why? Well, so that we could communicate music to others, and so that we could record and preserve the music that we had written. So a music notation system was developed over time. Initially, it was very complex. As you can imagine, you know, when you're first creating something, they tend to be overly complex. But over time, it has become quite a lot more simplified, luckily. And it becomes more simplified, I think, as we go along, as we realize that we don't need all the complications that were originally built in. The first concept is one of semitones and scales. So, okay, there we go. Just got a message saying I was famous. The concept of semitones and scales was introduced, along with time and key signatures and music punctuation. So we're going to talk about all these things. All right, so here's, first of all, I'll start with the concept of a scale. So this is a piano keyboard. Most of you will be familiar with what one of these looks like. And I've marked up the octave. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving on the screen, but there's middle C, if you like, and then the white notes going up, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So there's 7 of those. And then there's 5 black notes. So that makes up the 12 semitones. And you can see the black notes are C sharp or D flat, depending on whether we're going down or up, D sharp or E flat, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp or B flat. So a whole tone is 2 semitones rather than just 1 semitone. But we have 12 semitones to an octave. And so a semitone, we also call that a chromatic step. You'll notice that there's no E sharp or B sharp, because the keys go straight from E to F and straight from B to C. And there's no F flat or C flat because, again, the white keys go straight from F to E and from C to B. And so we would call E sharp, if you like, would be an enharmonic with F. In other words, it's the same pitch. So if we talked about E sharp, meaning that we wanted to raise the pitch of E one semitone, it would actually, we could also talk about F. That's what an enharmonic is. So the major scale is made up of set intervals, and it's whole tone, semitone, whole tone, semitone. In other words, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now, most of the examples I'm going to talk about tonight, I've just decided to use the key of C because it's nice and easy. When you translate into other keys, you start to have to use sharps and flats, which gets a bit complicated. The minor scale is different. It's a whole tone, but then it's a semitone. And then it's a whole tone, then it's a whole tone, then a semi, then a whole, then a whole. Now, let's have a listen to how those sound. This is a major scale. Okay, now here's the minor scale. You can hear how the minor scale sounds a bit sad. And sometimes we raise the last note, and this is called a harmonic minor scale. Kind of has a bit of a spooky sound to it, that last doo-doo sound. All right. And you can see here that the key of C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, has no sharps or flats. But in C minor, we had to write E flat, we had to write A flat, and we had to write B flat. So if we were writing the key of C minor, it would have 3 flats. We'll get to that a little bit later. So let's look at developing another scale. So we've got to use the same intervals. So this time we'll do the D major scale. So the same intervals, a whole tone from D to E, a whole tone from E to F sharp this time, then a semitone from F sharp to G, a whole tone to A, a whole tone to B, a whole tone to C sharp, and then a semitone to D. So you'll notice that the key of D major has 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. You'll also notice that we don't write G flat or D flat for F sharp or C sharp. We write it as F sharp and C sharp. And the reason is that we want to conserve consecutive lettering. In other words, we don't want to say D, E, G flat, G, A, B, D flat, D, because when we actually write that on the music score, we would get confused between G flat and G. So we write F sharp and C sharp. Now the D minor scale, you can see if we go whole tone from D to E, semitone to F, whole tone to G, whole tone to A, semitone to B flat, whole tone to C, whole tone to D. And again, we call it B flat, not A sharp. So as I said before, the D major key has 2 sharps, and the D minor key turns out to have 1 flat. So here's a whole list of all of the different scales with the different key signatures. So as you can see here at the top, we've got the C major scale, no sharps or flats. And then on the right-hand side, we have the major scales that use sharps, and you can see each one has an extra sharp as we go down the list. And then on the left-hand side, we've got the keys that have flats, F major, B flat major, and so on. And the reason we use a key signature is when we're playing in these different keys, we don't want to have to write the sharp and flat symbols on the score all the time. So it's sort of, if you like, it's in the reference section on the left-hand side, and so we would know that this note here, for example, B flat, is a flat, and this note here or down here is E flat. One thing you will notice though is when we get down the list a bit, say we get to B major, as I mentioned before, B is enharmonic with C flat. I mean, there's really no such note as C flat, but you know, theoretically we could write a C flat scale, but B major is the same as C flat. And F sharp would be the same as G flat. And C sharp would be the same as D flat. So you might ask yourself, well, why do they write why do they write the keys, why do they write D flat instead of C sharp, for example? Normally we would choose the key signature that has the least sharps and flats. Just makes it a bit easier to read. So, for example, D flat has 5 flats, whereas C sharp has 7 sharps. So it's easier to read the 5 flats. So we would choose to write D flat. Similarly, rather than writing 7 flats for C flat, we'd write 5 sharps for B major. All right, let's have a look at the minor scales now, because you heard the minor scales. They have different key signatures. Now, the minor scale that has no sharps or flats is actually A minor. And you can see down the right-hand side, here are all the minor keys that have sharps: E minor, B minor, F sharp minor, and so forth. And on the left-hand side, the minor keys that have flats: D minor, G minor, C minor. Remember we said C minor had 3 flats: E flat, A flat, and B flat. What I've done here now is the red letters are actually the major keys with the same key signature. So you can see here, for example, C major has the same key signature as A minor. G major has the same key signature as E minor, and so forth. And you can look down the list. You can look down both sides, and you'll notice something. Hopefully you'll notice a pattern. And the pattern is that the minor key is always 3 semitones lower than the major key. Because from E, F, F sharp, G, that's 3 semitones. So E minor is 3 semitones lower than G major. D, if we go down from D, C sharp, C, B, so B is 3 semitones. So there's always 3 semitones between the major and the minor. And we say that E minor is the relative minor to G major. So if I said to you, the relative minor to B flat major, you'd say G minor. And here it is over here on this side here. I hope I'm not confusing you. All of this stuff, it's going to be recorded, and you'll actually be able to, hopefully, I can also put this presentation on the BHA website, and you can download it and print it out if you want to. The other way we would say would be that G major is the relative major to E minor, or we would say that D major is the relative major to B minor, because they have the same key signature. And we still have those enharmonic key signatures down the bottom that we talked about before, such as B and C flat, F sharp and G flat, and so forth. So again, we would use the one that's got the least number of sharps or flats, just so it's easier to use. All right, so this brings us to what's called the circle of fifths. Now, the circle of fifths, it's an interesting concept. Basically, if you look at the circle, we start at C, and if we, what's happening here? If we go one step to the right, we go to G major, which has got 1 sharp. And it's a perfect fifth or 5 notes of the major scale from C, which is why it's called the circle of fifths. C, D, E, F, G, 5 notes. If we go another step, it's another 5 notes to the right, around the circle from G, A, B, C, D. So that's what's called the circle of fifths, and we can go both ways. So if we go the other way, if we go anti-clockwise instead of clockwise, F is 5 steps from C. C, B, A, G, F. And F is 5 steps from, sorry, B flat is 5 steps from F. And you can see going to the right or clockwise, we use the sharp keys, and going to the left, we use the flat keys.
Ian, I might just jump in on top of you for a second there. We've
Yeah.
got one of the attendees has a hand up here. Bob Whitworth has a question. Bob, I'm going to encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A button. So if you want to type your answer in there, then Ian can actually see what's happening and can see that question for you. But Ian, Manuel has asked a question about what is the purpose of having all these different scales? Could we write any piece of music on different scales?
Well, sure. Look, the reason we have different scales is because instruments have different ranges. Our voices have different ranges. So we have a bass singer who can sing, who needs to sing in a lower range than, say, a tenor or a soprano. So we would write those pieces of music at different pitches, and of course that requires us then that we might need to have a different scale. For example, a bass, the bass range, you know, normally a bass can sing down to about an F, whereas a tenor may only be able to sing down to a C or a D. So we would need to write the music in a higher key for the tenor. Hopefully that's enough explanation. But if there, you know, if you have more questions, just put it in the Q&A, and I'll attempt to answer it. I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A at the moment, but there's nothing there. All right, moving on. There we go. You'll notice that when we get around to B, we have to go to F sharp, not F, and that's because we've got to still go the 5 notes of the major scale. And you'll notice in the key of B there is an F sharp, so we would have to go to F sharp. And then we go, and of course, sorry, F sharp and G flat are the same, and that's where the sharps and flats cross over. And then we go around to D flat, which is enharmonic with C sharp, but then we start moving further around to A flat and so forth. So the circle of fifths drives a lot of barbershop harmony, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. You'll notice that on the outside we have the major keys, and on the inside we have the equivalent minor keys, and you'll notice that there's still 5 steps between the minor keys. So from A minor to E minor is 5 steps, A, B, C, D, E. And from E minor to B minor is 5 steps, E, F, G, A, B, and so forth. And again, we can go either to the right or clockwise, or we can go to the left or anti-clockwise. So this is rather a cool thing. And again, you'll notice that the minor key is always 3 semitones, or what we call a minor third, down from the major key. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about music notation now. So, because you'll see music written down, and you know, most of you will have a bit of an idea of what it all means, because you know you are curious, but you know, not many of you will know all of the ins and outs of all of this. So the fundamental unit is 4 beats, and we call this a whole note or a semi-breve, and that's the one on the top of that diagram. And then a 2-beat note is called a half note, or it's also called a minim. Half note and quarter note, that type of nomenclature is usually used in America, whereas the English system still tends to use the word semi-breve, minim, and then crotchet, which is a quarter note, which is a 1-beat note. Then we have a half-beat note, which would be an 8th note or a quaver. We've got a semi-quaver, which is a 1/16th note. Haven't got them on the diagram, but the next one down, a 1/32nd note, is called a demi-semi-quaver, and then you've got a hemi-demi-semi-quaver, which is 1/64th. So the demi-semi-quaver would have 3 little lines on its stem here, and the hemi-demi would have 4. The reason we don't use those is they're very difficult to read. We rarely get beyond the 16th notes. If you put a dot after the note, that halves the note length again. So for example, a dotted minim or a dotted half note, instead of having 2 beats, would then have 3 beats. A dotted crotchet or dotted quarter note would have 1.5 beats. And you can see a couple of examples there. You can have dotted any notes. So if you had a dotted quaver, for example, it would be, instead of 1/8, it'd be 3/16. We also have notation for rests, because sometimes in music we have rests, and here are some of the notations. And you can put a dot after these rests as well. They've left it blank, but you could have this symbol with a dot after it, or this symbol with a dot after it, or this symbol with a dot after it. Let's talk about time signatures now. So the most common time signatures are based on 2 or 3 subdivisions of the beat. So we call that either a simple or compound beat. So you can see some examples here. Simples based on 2 subdivisions and compounds based on 3. In the time signature, which you'll be familiar with when you look at a piece of music, 2/4, 6/8, 3/4, 9/8, and so forth. The top number tells you how many beats are in the bar. So 2 beats, so here we are, 2 beats. And the bottom number tells you the subdivision of the beats, or the length of the beat. So here we've got 2 quarter notes. Here we've got 6 8th notes, okay? Now, you could write it like that, but here are the 6 8 notes outside. But you normally, when you're doing 6/8, you'd normally feel that it was 2 beats that were tripled. So it'd be 1 2 3 2 2 3 1 2 3 2 2 3. Okay. So 4/4 is the most common time, and sometimes you'll see that written as a big C, standing for common time. 3/4 is the time that you generally hear for a waltz. So da 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 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 da 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 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 da da da. Okay, and then 6/8 is 6 beats to the bar, but it has a feel of 2 beats to the bar. So something like Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, might be something like 6/8. Okay, cup of coffee. All right. So you might say, well, how many beats per bar in 9/8 or 12/8? So the answer there, I can move my thing up. In 9/8, there'll be 3 lots of 3 beats. So it'll be 1 2 3 2 2 3 3 2 3 1 2 3 2 2 2 3, and 12/8 would be 4 lots. 1 2 3 2 2 3 3 2 3 4 2 3. Some mathematicians amongst you might ask, is 6/8 the same as 3/4? Because if they're the same fraction. But in fact, no, they're not, because you can see here 6/8 has a feel of 2 triple beats, whereas 3/4 has the feel of 3 single beats. So 1 2 3 2 2 3 versus 1 2 3 1 2 3. And there are other time signatures which are much rarer, but they do get used. And a good example is Jesus Christ Superstar, which I did some music direction for a year or so ago. And it's got time signatures like 7/4, 5/4, 3/8, 5/8. If you ever want to know what those sound like, have a listen to some of the songs from Jesus Christ Superstar. For example, try not to get worried. Try not to get worried, da 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 da, is in 5/4. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, da 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 da, 4, 5, da 2, 3, 4, 5, da 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 da, 4, 5, da 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 da. So that's in 5/4. Very famous song that's in 5/4. All right. Let's have a look at the sorts of music annotations you might see. So you'll see all these sorts of symbols on music, and it is handy to know what they mean. So you'll see bar lines, and you'll also see repeats. With the bar lines with the little dots means it repeats from that bar line in that direction or the other way. You'll see clef symbols, such as this one, and there are some others over on the right-hand side here, such as this one. You'll see note symbols. So there's a note symbol for a quaver, note symbol for a crotchet, and so forth. Sharps and flats. There's the sharp symbol. There's the flat symbol. Rests. So that's a quaver rest symbol. And somewhere down here, there's a crotchet rest symbol. I don't know why it's not with the quaver ones, but anyway, it's there. Dynamics. PP means pianissimo, very soft, or triple P. FP. F means fortissimo or loud. So these are Italian words. MF is moderately loud and so forth. You'll also see, sometimes you'll see a crescendo or decrescendo sign. So the one on the left is a crescendo and the one on the right is a decrescendo sign. Fermatas, also known as pauses. Sometimes you'll see these in barbershop music. Sometimes you'll see the del segno sign, which is this funny looking dollar sign, and the coda sign, which is this. Sometimes you see DS. And that just means from the del segno sign, repeat back. And then when you get to the coda, you jump to the coda, and that gives you the finish of the song. But not all of these are used in barbershop music. You won't see the ones that I've circled here very often in barbershop music at all, because in fact, some of these ones here, and these ones here are trills and different things. Some of these mean sing an octave higher or an octave lower. Some of these are for piano and so forth. And some are old and out of use. For example, I've never seen these note symbols written backwards or the flat symbols written backwards. So some of them are not in use anymore. All right, so let's have a look at music notation. So to show the wide range of pitches that we normally play and sing, we use a staff system. So this is called a staff. Sometimes it's also called a stave. And then this is called a staff, and it's also called a stave. And in this particular example, I've used two staves because that's normally what we have with barbershop music. We have a treble stave here with a treble clef, and we have a bass stave with a bass clef. Sometimes the treble clef is called a G clef because it also denotes where the note G is on this line here. You see where the circle of this thing is. And the bass clef is called the F clef because it shows you where this line is F. And everyone will probably recall this from school that, to remember the lines on the treble clef, every good boy deserves fruit. And if you translate that down to the bass clef, good boys deserve fruit always. And to remember the spaces, it's F, A, C, E. And to remember the spaces on the bass clef, it would be A, C, E, G. But the left-hand C shown on the treble clef is the same note here. This note here, C, is the same note as this note C on the bass clef, and we call this middle C. So it actually occurs between the two clefs, if you like, between the two staves. That's why we call it middle C. Now, some people sort of at this point of time, they sort of tear their hair out and say, well, how can I possibly remember all of those lines and letters and things? Well, you do know the alphabet, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They always go in that order. So it's easier just to learn a few key ones and then you can just interpolate. So, for example, on the treble clef, you don't need to learn them all, just learn a few key ones like middle C, like G, which is where the clef is, like C, which is that space, and F, which is the top line. And then you can work out the ones in between quite quickly, C, D, E, F, whatever. And the same with the bass clef. Learn a few key ones such as G, C, F, and C, and then you can interpolate the other ones. You also notice that, you know, like middle C, but also, for example, this note here, the A in the treble clef and the E in the bass clef, the very bottom E, they're below or above the clef, and so they've got a little line drawn through them, which is called a ledger line. And if we look a little bit more at ledger lines, you can see here that, in fact, you know, they can continue way up above the staff or way below the staff in either treble or bass. But we rarely sing, you know, much beyond the staff. Sometimes you'll see tenor parts written up to a C, which is 2 ledger lines. And sometimes you'll see the bass written down to E, which is 1 ledger line below the bass clef. Occasionally you'll see the baritone written with some ledger lines above the bass clef. This is really so that we don't have to change clefs for the baritone. We don't want to halfway through change the clef of the baritone part from bass clef to treble clef, so sometimes we'll use the ledger lines. Sometimes, but a little bit more rarely, you'll see the lead part written with some ledger lines below the treble clef, but not very often. In instrumental music, we do use the ledger lines a lot more because a lot of the instruments will play outside of the normal range of the staffs. All right, so we can number the notes of the scale with numbers or Roman numerals. So, you know, you've all done the exercise 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, so forth. So in the key of C, we would call C note 1 or Roman numeral 1, D would be 2, E would be 3, F would be 4, and so forth. And we go up to 8, although we would normally, when we get to the next C, for example, so we go from C, D, E, F, G up to B, when we get to the next C, that would actually become note number 1 of the next scale up. We wouldn't continue using 9 and so forth. Although when we designate chords, sometimes we use 9, 11, and 13 and stuff, but that's very advanced stuff, which I'm not going to touch on tonight. Just going to answer Richard's question here. He's asked, when we sing ballads, the notes normally don't have time value. We just ignore the time value of the notes. And that's true to an extent. You know, we would normally, you know, we can, it's called rubato, where we can change the feel and the note length of the music, but we would still generally, you know, in terms of the whole bar, like the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, we would still sing within that type of tempo. So we would still maintain a bit of a tempo to the song, even though we might change some of the note values to perhaps emphasize some words and things. All right, just get back to this. Roman numerals are also used to designate chords, which I'll talk about later, but you can see here that every note from 1 to 7 has a Roman numeral, and that's important to remember. And then I've just shown that if we were in the relative minor, for example, A minor, which is the relative minor to C major, the blue numbers down the bottom here show the numbers that you would have in the A minor scale. All right, I've got one more screen about music notation because there is quite a lot and there's quite a lot of terms. And don't be confused by all these. You know, most of the time I just use note number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't bother with terms such as the ones on this screen, but I'm just letting you know about them because sometimes you'll hear them used. So, for example, in the key of C, note number 1 is sometimes called the tonic, and sometimes it's called the root. Note number 2 is sometimes called the supertonic, and then you'll see note 3 mediant, note 4 subdominant, 5 dominant, 6 submediant. 7 is called the leading tone, and 7 is an important note in the scale because if you think about it, in the key of C, the 7th note is B. In the key of G, which is the key with 1 sharp, so it's the next step around the circle of fifths, the 7th note of the key of C becomes the 3rd note of the key of G, so G, A, B. And the 3rd note is a very important note in the chord. So let's have a look at an example because I'm sure you're getting a bit sick of all this stuff. So let's have a look at an example here of some music. This is Honey Little Eyes, and let's identify some of these features we've been talking about. So here's a stave and the staff. So we've got the treble and the bass staff. Putting them together, sometimes you'll see this big bracket. It's called a grand stave or a grand staff. You can see here we've got the treble clef. In this case, we've got an 8 written underneath it, which means that it sounds an octave lower than written. And the reason we do this in barbershop music is because the leads and tenors actually sing an octave lower than is actually written here, but we don't have a clef for that, and we want to keep the 2 parts separate to make it easy to read. So we write the lead and tenor parts in the treble clef, but they actually sound an octave lower. It's not something to particularly worry about, to be honest. Here's the bass clef, because, for example, in Sweet Adeline's music, they do the opposite. The treble clef is actually the pitch that they sing, but they use the bass clef and they put a little 8 above it to indicate that their basses and baritones are not singing as low as it's written. There's the key signature. You can see it's got 2 flats. There's the time signature. You can see it's a big C, which also stands for 4/4 or common time. We've got a quaver note there. We've got a crotchet. We've got some dotted crotchets here. Over here, we've got some beamed quavers. Sometimes when we've got 2 quavers written together, we beam them, makes them a bit easier to pick, that you can see, oh yes, they're all beamed quavers rather than crotchets, and then you've got to quickly read how many tails they've got and things. Over here we've got a tied minim. So this is a minim, and then it's tied to a crotchet with this line. So it actually sounds as 3 beats. So this could have been written as a dotted minim like this one down here. The reason it wasn't is probably because the arranger wanted an emphasis on this well word as the echo comes through. So wanted the lead to know that there needed to be a bit of a beat on that well. There's a crotchet rest down here at the end. There's a quaver rest in here for the tenors. Bar line in here. We've got a double bar line at the end. We've got bar numbers. You can see these little numbers above each of the bar lines. Tells you which bar number it is. We've got these sharps and flat cymbals and natural cymbals, which are called accidentals. There's another one over here in this flat cymbal. We've got one flat cymbal here that's written in brackets, and that's called a courtesy accidental because theoretically we've got an E flat over here, and so every note written on that line would be E flat, but you can see in the bar before it's E natural, it's been raised a semitone. When we go across the bar line, that's all cancelled out, so it goes back to a flat. So they've written the flat in there just to remind you that you should go flat to the E flat again. So that's why it's called a courtesy accidental. Some arrangers use them, some don't. I like to use them because it makes the music easier to read. We've got a fermata here, or a pause, on the very first chord. So, oh, honey, honey. So that's how we sing it. All right, let's make some music now. Let's have a look at some scales and different things, and let's have a listen to some intervals and so forth. So if we think about the intervals of the scale, because now we're going to start building music, we're going to start building harmony, rather than just playing one note, we're going to play two notes. You can see here on the left-hand side, we've got what we call the intervals of the major scale, and then we've got some other odd intervals here on the right. There's a diagram here, and it gives each of these intervals a name. If you're going to get into sight singing, you do need to learn to be able to pitch and sing these different intervals. Makes sight singing easy. Really important interval is what's called a tritone. Technically, it's an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. It's critical in barbershop because it actually creates the typical barbershop seventh sound that we hear. We'll never hear a minor second, or very rarely, and a major seventh. We will not hear very often because they're quite discordant, and in barbershop harmony we don't want to have discords. You'll hear all those other intervals in barbershop music. So let's just have a listen to what these intervals sound like. So that's unison. It's a major second, major third, a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh. You can hear how that's dissonant, and then the octave. And now here comes those other weird ones. Minor second, not very nice. Minor third. This is the augmented fourth or tritone. That's the minor sixth, and that's the minor seventh. So you can hear how all of those sound. So now we're going to start making chords. A chord needs three notes, and we call this a triad. Not to be confused with the Chinese gangs. I made a joke. So the notes are 1, 3, and 5 of the scale. And really, it's two stacked thirds, if you like. If you can see, you look at the music there, we've got a minor, so for the first chord there, a major chord, we've got a major third, so I've written that as a capital M, and then on top of that is a minor third, which is a small m. And the minor chord would be the other way around. It's a minor third with a major third on top. There's a major chord. And there's a minor chord. Okay. But barbershop is 4 voices. So if we're going to make chords in barbershop, we need to either double one of those notes that's in the triad, or we introduce a fourth note. And often the fourth note we introduce is what we call the flattened seventh. Also, as you saw in a previous example, we don't always write the notes so close together. So you don't see triads written in barbershop music. So let's have a look at some seventh chords. Let's hear how these sound. For example, if we add the flattened seventh, we create what's called the dominant seventh chord. And it's the most prevalent chord in barbershop music. It gives barbershop the characteristic barbershop seventh, and it actually pulls the harmony around the circle of fifths, which is why the circle of fifths is so important. And you can see here seventh chords are made up of stacked major and minor thirds as well, just in different orders. So for example, the C7 or dominant seventh chord is major third, minor third, minor third. The major seventh is major, minor, major. The minor seventh is minor, major, minor. Then we've got this one, which is called the diminished seventh, which is minor, minor, minor. And then a half diminished, which is minor, minor, major. Let's have a listen to how each of those sounds. There's the dominant seventh. Major major seventh, minor seventh, diminished seventh, half diminished sevenths. You can hear that they're all different. Now I want to talk about chord inversions because we had the triads written, but if you have three notes, you can imagine you can write them in different orders. So we've got what we call root position, which is 1, 3, 5. We've got first inversion, which is 3, 5, 1. And we've got second inversion, which is 5, 1, 3. And we call this the root position because note 1, or the root, is the lowest note in the chord. And then this is the first inversion because 3 is now the third is now the lowest note. And here the second inversion, the fifth, is now the lowest note. And we can extend this to the sevenths because if we have 4 notes in the chord, we can have all of those different inversions again. So we have an extra inversion, which is called the third inversion, which would have the seventh in the as the bass note. Now, not all of these chords sound particularly good. Generally, the root position and the second inversion of the chord sound pretty good. First inversion and the third inversion can sound a bit weak. So when we're arranging barbershop music, we tend to stay away from the first inversion and the third inversion. We also, sometimes when we're writing down chords and indicating what the chord is, we'll sometimes write a little A after the chord to indicate that it's root position, or a little B to indicate first inversion, C for second, and D for third inversion. So here's the root position, first inversion, second inversion. So that's of the triad. Now let's hear the sevenths. Root position, first inversion, second inversion, third inversion. So you can hear how they all sound a bit different. Okay, I'm just going to pause there for a minute. Rob Lee has asked a question, and he's asked me about the treble clef with the 8 underneath it. It would be important to mix choruses and quartets. And yes, it is. So normally with a mixed chorus or quartet, we wouldn't use the 8. So the soprano and alto would actually sound as the pitch that they actually sing. So when you look at, and I don't have an example of that, but if you looked at a mixed quartet a piece of music, you would see there wasn't an 8 there. Now I'm gonna skip through this slide because time's getting away on us, and I threw this in as a bit of an interest thing, but I think we'll just skip this. I wanted to talk about how different chords in a scale are either major or minor. But just take my word for it here. For example, in the key of C, a C chord would be major. If we build a chord on D in the C scale, it would be a minor chord. E would be a minor chord. F and G would be major. A would be a minor chord, and B would be a diminished chord. And if you did the same in every key, you can see the pattern's exactly the same. So chord number 1, chord number 4, and chord number 5 are major chords. Chords number 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and chord 7 is always diminished. So this is pretty important when we're building harmonies, which is why we tend to use chords 1, 4, and 5. And we only use chords 2, 3, and 6 for effect. So I'm just going to skip through this. I'll skip that. Okay, so circle of fifths. So now we're back to talking about circle of fifths again. So in barbershop music, we move around the circle of fifths. So we want to progress from one key to the other, and the way we circle back through the different chords is when we throw in the seventh, which makes us want to resolve to the next chord in the circle of fifths. And that's what gives Barbershop its distinctive sound. So if we stayed in the key of C, for example, then moving around the circle would involve major and minor chords. Remember, we talked about that the second and third chords and the sixth chords are minor in every key, and only chords 1, 4, and 5. So it would sound a bit weird if we kept swapping between minor and major chords. So in barbershop music, we actually try to do major chords, and so we have to actually momentarily change out of the key and then come back into the key again, which is why you'll often see the sharps and flats written in barbershop music. So I'm just going to play you an example here of, I'm going to move around the circle of fifths, and I'm going to play the chord of C, and then I'm going to go from E to A to D to G to C. First of all, I'm going to be using just the notes of the scale of C. So it'll be E minor, A minor, D minor, and then it'll be G major and C major. And then I'm going to play it as E major, A major, D major, G major, and C major. And you'll hear the difference, and you'll hear how much happier the music sounds. So there's the chord of C, there's E minor, A minor, D. All right. This is the major chords. Okay, so you can hear the difference. Here's it sounds sad, whereas the other one sounds happy, and of course we want to have happy music. What I did just then was I added the seventh, so you can hear how the seventh pulls you around. And I just played a slightly different order of notes in the chords, but you can hear how those last set of chords probably sounded the best of any of those progressions. We'll skip that. Okay, so let's apply this to barbershop. All right. So the to answer Sally's question here, I'll put the presentation online, and you'll be able to play these chords and have a listen yourself. And Richard has a question. When we sing up tunes in barbershop, tempo is a key theme of a song. Okay. Would an up tune always have tempo as one of its top 1 to 2 themes? Probably, yes. It probably would have, the tempo would be an important part of and the rhythm would be an important part of the theme of the song. So, for example, in this song, you'll hear almost an opposite example of that, Richard, because I've actually played this quite slowly because I wanted to just demonstrate some of the musical elements. But let's have a listen to 5'2". So here's the music. Just click there. Here we go. All right, so you all know 5'2". It's a really good example of the circle of fifths, which is why I've used it. Not every song has such a good circle of fifths. So let's play it again, and this time, for example, if we have a look at the first chord over here, first of all, you'll see that it's in 4/4, and the first chord, the bass sings a C, baritone sings G, lead sings E, and the tenor sings C. So we have a C chord there. Then the next chord, bass is still on C, but baritone has gone down to E, lead has gone up to G, and tenor's on C. So we still have a C chord, but really just as you can see here, the lead and the baritone have just swapped notes. And then they swap back again for that chord. But then this chord here is a different chord, and now we've got a sharp. Okay, so instantly know that we've gone out of the key of C, we've gone into a different key, and we can figure it out. If we look at the notes here, we've got B, G sharp, E, and D. If I think back to my major keys, because it sounds like a major chord, the chord that has E, G sharp, B would be E major, and then D is the 7th. And so you can also see here that we don't have E in the bass, we've got B. So B is the 5th note of the chord, so we've actually got a second inversion here. So we'll work our way through the music, and I'll just show you what all the note numbers are and what the chords and inversions are. So here we go. So you can see, even though there was quite a lot of notes moving upwards and downwards, then we actually only pretty much changed chord once every bar. And in fact, we stayed in the A chord for 2 bars. And you can see there we went from C, which is chord 1, then we went to chord 3, which is E, then 6A, 2D, 5G, and 1C. And if you have a look back at the circle of fifths, you'll see that we've just stepped through each of the steps around the circle of fifths from E back to C. And by adding the 7th, we pulled it around the circle of fifths and gave it that distinctive barbershop sound. Right, here's another example. Oh, sorry, this is just, this is actually the key that we actually sing 5'2" in. We actually sing it in E flat. How do we tell that it's E flat major and not a minor? Well, the first chord and the last chord are E flat. The time signature is 4/4, as we talked about. There are 4 beats to a bar. Anything to watch. So when I'm looking at a piece of music, first of all I scan to see if there's anything to watch out for. Well, there's quite a few accidentals through it, and there's an unusual rhythm here with this tied note over here. All right, we're coming to the end. We're just going to examine another couple of pieces of music. So this is Any Time at All. So first of all, you might ask yourself, what's the key? Okay, is it major or minor? How can we tell? Okay, so what's the first chord? So the first chord, we've got an A down here, but we've got a flat over here. So that'll be A flat, and then another A flat there, C and E flat. So that's an A flat chord. And in fact, the key of A flat has 4 flats. So I would say it's probably the key of A flat. The time signature is 12/8. And remember, we talked about 12/8. So there's 12 quarter notes to a bar. So this is one that has that triple feel about it. So it's 4 beats, but then 3 subdivisions. So it's 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. After a quick scan, anything to watch out for? Well, if you're a tenor, you'll notice that we've got a lot of inverted tenor and lead notes. We've got some tied notes here, which are probably going to make the rhythm a bit tricky. We've got some accidentals here as well, which we're going to need to be careful about. So I always do this with a new piece of music, scan it and see if there's any traps. Here's the second page. Let's have a quick look at the chord progression from bars 5 to 8. You can see here we've got an A flat chord here. Then we go to C, which is chord number 3 from A flat. And then we go chord 4, and then we go chord 1. The lead notes in bar 9 with the double beams would be semiquavers. And can you clap the rhythm of the lead part in bars 5 to 8? So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, time 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. I might have got that wrong because I'm not used to counting and clapping. But honey, just let me know. So this is a tricky song because of those that triplet rhythm. All right, the last one here is down by the Old Mill Stream. So this is, I put the whole piece of music up here. You know, and we can look at different features here. I've posed a whole lot of questions there, and you could work your way through those. I have provided the answers on the next page, the next couple of pages, in fact. And if you want to download the presentation, you can see all those answers. But unfortunately, it looks like we've just about run out of time. Where are we? Questions. I'll just see if there's any more questions. Doesn't look like there are. I will thank you. I do run courses on sight singing and also arranging. And apologies for the vocal. This vocal's not mine, but here's a song about music theory. If it's going to play.
Major sixth stepping down to do. Major seconds being sung by a choir. Chromatic alterations of the scale. Diatonic scale. Descending scale to minor third. Major 6, 2, 5, 7 of 4. Major seconds with their ears open wide will hear a pretty tritone tonight.
Right, and you can hear the rest of that if you download the presentation. All right, so I shall sign off there and hand back to Dan.
Great, thank you, Ian, and thank you to all of you for being part of our ongoing Harmony Academy series of educational events hosted by Barbershop Harmony Australia. I hope this session tonight has given you a few more tools to put into your bag. Just remember though that this session and all of our sessions are recorded and available via a link on the BHA Facebook page that takes you to our YouTube channel, or you can just go into YouTube and search for Barbershop Harmony Australia. All of those things are very, very searchable and easy to find. Now, next week, we have a great session lined up for you all about using comedy in your performance. This is going to give you some great ideas about the way that you guys can all use comedy and different styles of stagecraft to get a good laugh out of an audience for all the right reasons. The following week, we have a really good session on vocal health from one of Australia's most accomplished vocal coaches, which will no doubt be really useful to all of us who've been singing maybe a little bit less than we would usually do during the last few months. Hey, it's important to keep those skills up, so that session should really help us out. Now, these sessions will all be advertised on the BHA Facebook page, so keep an eye out so that you can take advantage of all of these educational opportunities and recommend these sessions to your friends. So once again, a big thank you to Ian. Thanks again to all of you, and we hope you have a great week. And remember, keep singing.